as we afterwards found, knew of our arrival. As silently as possible, the great flat boat which we had brought from St. Simon's was filled with men. Major Strong was sent on shore with 2 companies, those of Captain James and Captain Metcalfe, with instructions to surround the town quietly, allow no one to leave it, molest no one, and hold as temporary prisoners every man whom he found. I watched them push off into the darkness, got the remaining force ready to land, and then paced the deck for an hour in silent watchfulness, waiting for rifle shots. Not a sound came from the shore, save the barking of dogs and the morning crow of cocks. The time seemed interminable, but when daylight came, I landed and found a pair of scarlet trousers pacing on their beat before every house in the village, and a small squad of prisoners, stunted and forlorn as Falstaff's ragged regiment, already in hand. I observed with delight the good demeanor of my men towards the forlorn Anglo-Saxons, and towards the more tumultuous women. Even one soldier, who threatened to throw an old termagant into the river, took care to append the courteous epithet, Madam. I took a survey of the premises. The chief house, a pretty one with picturesque outbuildings, was that of Mrs. A., who owned the mills and lumber wharves adjoining. The wealth of these wharves had not been exaggerated. There was lumber enough to freight 6 steamers, and I half regretted that I had agreed to take down a freight of bricks instead. Further researches made me grateful that I had already explained to my men the difference between public foraging and private plunder. Along the river bank I found building after building crowded with costly furniture, all neatly packed, just as it was sent up from St. Mary's when the town was abandoned. Pianos were a drug, china, glassware, mahogany, pictures were all here. And here were my men, who knew that their own labor had earned for their masters these luxuries, or such as these, their own wives and children were still sleeping on the floor, perhaps at Beaufort or Fernandina, and yet they submitted almost without a murmur to the enforced abstinence. Bed and bedding for our hospitals they might take from those storerooms, such as the surgeon selected, also an old flag which we found in a corner, and an old field-piece which the regiment still possesses. But after this the doors were closed and left unmolested. It cost a struggle to some of the men whose wives were destitute, I know, but their pride was very easily touched, and when this abstinence was once recognized as a rule, they claimed it as an honor, in this and all succeeding expeditions. I flatter myself that, if they had once been set upon wholesome plundering, they would have done it as thoroughly as their betters. But I have always been infinitely grateful both for the credit and for the discipline of the regiment, as well as for the men's subsequent lives, that the opposite method was adopted. When the morning was a little advanced, I called on Mrs. A., who received me in quite a stately way at her own door, with, "To what am I indebted for the honor of this visit, sir?" The foreign name of the family, and the tropical look of the buildings, made it seem, as indeed did all the rest of the adventure, like a chapter out of Amyas Leigh. But as I happened to hear that the lady herself was a Philadelphian, and her deceased husband a New Yorker, I could not feel even that modicum of reverence due to sincere Southerners. However, I wished to present my credentials, so calling up my companion, I said that I believed she had been previously acquainted with Corporal Robert Sutton. I never saw a finer bit of unutterable indignation that came over the face of my hostess, as she slowly recognized him. She drew herself up, and dropped out the monosyllables of her answer as if they were so many drops of nitric acid. "Ah," quoth my lady, "we called him Bob." It was a group for a painter. The whole drama of the war seemed to reverse itself in an instant, and my tall, well-dressed, imposing, philosophic corporal dropped down the immeasurable depth into a mere plantation Bob again. So, at least, in my imagination, not to that person himself. Too essentially dignified in his nature to be moved by words where substantial realities were in question, he simply turned from the lady, touched his hat to me, and asked if I would wish to see the slave jail, as he had the keys in his possession. If he fancied that I was in danger of being overcome by blandishments, and needed to be recalled to realities, it was a master stroke. I must say that when that door of that villainous edifice was thrown open before me, I felt glad that my main interview with the lady proprietor had passed before I saw it. It was a small building, like a northern corn barn, and seemed to be as prominent and as legitimate a place among the outbuildings of the establishment. In the middle of the door was a large staple with a rusty chain, like an ox chain, for fastening a victim down. When the door had been opened after the death of the late proprietor, my informant said, a man was found padlocked in that chain. We found also 3 pairs of stocks of various construction, 2 of which had smaller as well as larger holes, evidently for the feet of women or children. In a building near by we found something far more complicated, which was perfectly unintelligible till the men explained all its parts. A machine so contrived that a person once imprisoned in it could neither sit, stand, nor lie, but must support the body half raised in a position scarcely endurable. I have since bitterly reproached myself for leaving this piece of ingenuity behind, but it would have cost much labor to remove it, and to bring away the other trophies seemed then enough. I remember the unutterable loathing with which I leaned against the door of that prison house. I had thought myself seasoned to any conceivable horrors of slavery, but it seemed as if the visible presence of that den of sin would choke me. Of course it would have been burned to the ground by us, but that this would have involved the sacrifice of every other building and all the piles of lumber, and for the moment it seemed as if the sacrifice would be righteous. But I forbore, and only took the trophies, the instruments of torture, and the keys of the jail. We found but a few colored people in this vicinity. Some we brought away with us, and an old man and woman preferred to remain. All the white males whom we found I took as hostages, in order to shield us, if possible, from attack on our way down river, explaining to them that they would be put ashore once the dangerous points were passed. I knew that their wives could easily send notice of this fact to the rebel forces along the river. My hostages were a forlorn-looking set of crackers, far inferior to our soldiers in physique, and yet quite equal, the latter declared, to the average material of the Southern armies. None were in uniform, but this proved nothing as to their being soldiers. One of them, a mere boy, was captured at his own door with gun in hand. It was a fowling piece, which he used only, as his mother plaintively assured me, to shoot little birds with. As the guileless youth had for this purpose loaded the gun with 18 buckshot, we thought it justifiable to confiscate both the weapon and the owner, in mercy to the birds. We took from this place, for the use of the army, a flock of some 30 sheep, 40 bushels of rice, some other provisions, tools, oars, and a little lumber, leaving all possible space for the bricks which we expected to obtain just below. I should have gone further up the river, but for a dangerous boom which kept back a great number of logs in a large brook that here fell into St. Mary's. The stream ran with force, and if the rebels had wit enough to do it, they might in 10 minutes so choke the river with driftwood as infinitely to enhance our troubles. So we dropped down the stream a mile or 2, found the very brickyard from which the Fort Clinch had been constructed, still stored with bricks, and seemingly unprotected. Here Sergeant Rivers again planted his standard, and the men toiled eagerly for several hours, in loading our boat to the utmost with bricks. Meanwhile we questioned black and white witnesses, and learned for the first time that the rebels admitted a repulse at Township Landing, and that Lieutenant Jones and 10 of their number were killed, though this I fancy to have been an exaggeration. They have also declared that the mysterious steamer Barossa was lying at the head of the river, was but a broken-down and worthless affair, and would never get to sea. The result has since proved this, for the vessel subsequently ran the blockade and foundered near shore, the crew barely escaping with their lives. I had the pleasure, as it happened, of being the first person to forward this information to Admiral Dupont, when it came through the pickets many months after, thus concluding my report on the Barossa. Before the work at the yard was over, the pickets reported mounted men in the woods near by, as had previously been the report at Woodstock. This admonished us to lose no time, and as we left the wharf, immediate arrangements were made to have the gun crews in all readiness, and to keep the rest of the men below, since their musketry would be of little use now, and I did not propose to risk a life unnecessarily. The chief obstacle to this was their own eagerness. Penned down on one side, they popped up on the other. Their officers, too, were eager to see what was going on, and were almost as hard to cork down as the men. Add to this that the vessel was now very crowded, and that I had to be chiefly on the hurricane deck with the pilots. Captain Clinton, master of the vessel, was brave to excess, and as much excited as the men. He could no more be kept in the little pilot-house than they below, and when he had passed 1 or 2 bluffs with no sign of the enemy, he grew more and more irrepressible, and exposed himself conspicuously on the upper deck. Perhaps we were all a little lulled by the apparent safety. For myself, I lay down for a moment on a settee in a state-room, having been on my feet almost without cessation